How did a small town in the heart of Italy manage to subjugate powerful kingdoms and barbarian tribes, extending its dominion across 3 continents? The secret lay not only in the physical strength of its soldiers, but in the way the Roman army operated as an unstoppable, perfectly tuned machine. Each legionary knew exactly what their role was, and obedience to orders was non-negotiable. Formations were designed to confuse the enemy, and long-term strategies ensured that the legions were always one step ahead. For the soldiers, victory wasn't an option. It was a duty, and failure meant severe punishment such as the dreaded decimation. This mix of rigid discipline and ingenious tactics made their enemies fear the sound of Roman footsteps on the horizon, announcing not just a battle but the end of their resistance. Their enemies knew, when they heard the sound of Roman sandals marching, they wouldn't be facing an ordinary army. The legions carried more than physical strength. They brought precision, discipline, and flawless planning. Unlike other armies that relied on numbers or spur-of-the-moment force, the Romans operated like a well-tuned machine. Every soldier knew their task, every formation had a purpose, and every campaign was meticulously planned to ensure both short-term and long-term success. This combination of methodical strategy and iron discipline transformed the Roman army into one of the most effective forces in history, capable of conquering territories and maintaining control for centuries. Training and discipline, the heart of the Roman legions. Amid the scorching heat of the Italian plains or the biting cold of northern frontiers, Roman soldiers weren't shaped by chance. From the first day of training, a recruit was treated less as an individual and more as a cog in a much larger machine. The army didn't need isolated heroes. It needed men capable of acting as one without hesitation. And that's exactly what their training aimed to achieve. The rigor started with the basics, marching. It wasn't enough to march correctly. They had to do it for miles, carrying heavy armor, spears, shields, and supplies. If any man fell out of rhythm or let the weight get the better of him, the entire group faced the consequences. This was their first lesson in collective discipline. If one failed, they all failed. This grueling training wasn't just about physical endurance. It was about breaking individual egos and instilling a legionary mindset. Discipline wasn't just demanded in minor details, it was tested in extreme situations where mistakes could mean the defeat of the entire legion. Commanders simulated chaos, ambushes, and night attacks to teach soldiers to stay calm under pressure. The motto was simple: obey first, think later. In battle, every second of hesitation could mean death. There was no room for doubts or debates. If the order was to charge at an enemy line that seemed impenetrable, the soldier charged. If the command was to hold position while arrows rained from the sky, he stood firm. This blind obedience didn't come naturally. It was cultivated through a system of brutal punishments and strategic rewards. The slightest insubordination could result in physical punishment, such as whippings or carrying extra weight. In more serious cases like desertion or cowardice in battle, the punishment was the infamous decimation, a terrifying practice where a group of soldiers was divided, and 1 out of every 10 was chosen by lot to be executed by their own comrades. This method not only eliminated the weak, but also sent a clear message. Discipline was sacred, and its violation had fatal consequences. But why would anyone willingly endure such training without fleeing? The answer lay in the other side of this: brutal coin, the promise of honor, financial stability, and the possibility of social advancement. A disciplined and obedient legionary could accumulate wealth through plunder, receive land after years of service, and with luck, gain a position of prestige in Roman society. For many poor farmers or citizens seeking glory, the price of sacrifice seemed worth it. This combination of fear and reward was so effective that even in extreme situations, surrounded by enemies, wounded, or lacking supplies, soldiers maintained their formation and followed orders. Their training conditioned them to believe that survival alone was impossible, but survival as part of the legion was a real possibility. This collective conditioning gave the Roman legions a unique psychological advantage. Facing larger enemy forces wasn't a problem, because the Romans trusted their organization. Every move on the battlefield was the result of years of choreographed training. Shields were raised at the right moment, spears advanced in coordinated thrusts, and formations adapted quickly to changes in terrain or enemy attacks. While many armies crumbled at the first sign of chaos, the Romans thrived in it. However, this discipline wasn't limited to the battlefield. Continuous training shaped the soldiers' behavior in every aspect of life. When they weren't fighting, they were building bridges, fortifications, roads, and camps. This versatility was a product of the same unyielding discipline, whether they wielded a sword or a shovel. Orders had to be carried out, and this had a profound strategic impact. By constructing permanent infrastructure wherever they went, the Roman legions not only ensured supplies and communication during campaigns, but also left a lasting legacy of control over conquered territories. For a legionary, discipline was both an invisible armor and a chain that bound him. It protected the army from disorganization, but came at a price. There was no room for weakness or failure. Absolute loyalty was demanded, and disobedience was punished mercilessly. But it was precisely this rigidity that turned lost battles into strategic victories and maintained control over an empire that spanned thousands of miles. While many armies of the time relied on charismatic leaders or individual warriors, Romans understood that real power lay in collective discipline. In the end, a lone man could be brave, but he wouldn't conquer an empire. A disciplined legion would. And it was this foundation of discipline that gave rise to their highly effective combat tactics, such as the testudo formation, where their shields became a moving wall. Battle formations and long-term strategies. Trained to exhaustion to react as a single unit, Roman legionaries could turn the chaos of the battlefield into a deadly choreography. The testudo formation was the perfect example of this. Under a hail of enemy arrows, when other armies would collapse into despair, the Romans would gather into a living wall. The men in the front rows held their shields aligned at chest height, while those behind them raised theirs above their comrades' heads, forming an almost impenetrable protective roof. Seen from afar, this formation looked like a giant metal turtle advancing slowly but inexorably toward the enemy. But the secret of the testudo wasn't just the protection it offered against enemy projectiles. It lay in the absolute trust that each soldier would hold their position, even under pressure. If one man wavered, the entire structure would collapse. But they didn't waver. The same conditioning that enabled legionaries to march for miles without breaking formation prepared them to endure the psychological impact of arrows raining down without abandoning their positions. This didn't mean the testudo was indestructible, but in many cases, it was enough to ensure a safe approach to enemy lines, and once the Romans reached their target, they rarely lost. However, these formations weren't just temporary solutions. For moments of crisis, they were part of a much larger strategic vision. For Roman commanders, winning a battle was important, but ensuring that their legions could keep winning throughout an entire campaign was essential. That's why their strategies went far beyond direct combat. As the army moved through enemy territory, it didn't just leave footprints, it left roads, bridges, and fortresses, each serving a well-defined purpose. The Roman roads, many of which can still be found across Europe today, weren't just means of transportation. They were vital arteries for maintaining the army. Through them, supplies reached the troops quickly, reinforcements could be deployed without delay, and critical information traveled efficiently. This infrastructure also ensured that, even far from home, the Romans didn't rely on local resources to survive. If a conquered territory was hostile or infertile, it didn't matter. Their supplies came from far away but always arrived on time. In addition to roads, the Romans built fortified camps during their campaigns. At the end of each day's march, even when exhausted, the soldiers didn't rest until the camp was properly set up and protected by trenches and palisades. These camps weren't temporary or improvised like those of many armies at the time. They were designed as small fortresses, complete with watchtowers and well-defined areas for storing food, equipment, and even spaces for religious rituals. This not only kept troop morale high, but also minimized the risk of being ambushed during the night. The psychological effect of this organization was devastating for their enemies. While many armies relied on looting or succumbed to exhaustion after days of marching, the Romans always seemed well organized, with abundant supplies and unshakable morale. For the peoples who faced the legions, this was proof that they weren't dealing with an ordinary army, but with a force that had planned every move as if victory were inevitable. And this sense of inevitability was part of what made the Romans so dangerous. They didn't rely solely on swift victories. If a battle wasn't immediately decided, the legions had the patience and structure to endure, reorganize, and strike again, this time even more devastatingly. Even when faced with defeats, such as ambushes or surprise attacks, their overall strategy remained intact because their logistical support was never compromised. Behind the testudo formation and the vast network of roads lay a simple principle: control. On the battlefield, in logistics, and in the occupation of conquered territories, the Romans controlled every detail. But this discipline and planning only worked because every soldier, from the common legionary to the highest-ranking officer, understood that war was a collective effort. And that effort extended far beyond wielding weapons and raising shields. Thus, the life of a legionary wasn't limited to battles. During periods of calm, he was a stonemason, an engineer, and a builder, paving the way for future victories. After all, conquering wasn't enough. It was essential to consolidate control. And as we'll see, the individual discipline of each soldier was the foundation of this constant adaptability. But what truly sustained this unwavering obedience? The role of the common legionary. For a Roman legionary, war wasn't just a series of battles, but a routine of construction, discipline, and constant physical labor. When not engaged in combat, soldiers dedicated themselves to building bridges, digging trenches, constructing fortresses, and paving roads. The survival of the army didn't depend solely on defeating the enemy, but on the infrastructure that supported it through campaigns that could last for years. The common legionary was both a soldier and an engineer. Under strict orders, he built fortified camps at the end of each day's march, following a meticulous plan that allowed each camp to be quickly converted into a defensive fortress. Soldiers used their construction tools almost as much as their weapons, and manual labor was an essential part of their training. It wasn't uncommon for legionaries to pave roads during a campaign, roads that would later be used by their own reinforcements and supply lines, ensuring the army remained well supplied even in unknown or hostile territories. This multifunctional role not only enhanced the effectiveness of Roman campaigns, but also kept the soldiers busy and disciplined. Idleness was seen as a threat. Idle soldiers might question orders, spread discontent, or even plot mutinies. The intense routine, on the other hand, kept everyone aligned with the command's objectives and reduced the likelihood of insubordination. However, when discipline was broken, the Roman army didn't hesitate to remind its men of the price of disobedience. Among the most feared punishments was decimation. In severe cases of insubordination or collective cowardice, an entire legion could be subjected to this brutal method. Soldiers were organized into groups of 10, and fate would decide who would be executed. The remaining members of the group were responsible for carrying out the execution themselves, forcing them to bear the psychological burden of the punishment. Decimation wasn't common, but its constant threat served as a harsh reminder that individual disobedience could lead to collective death. This balance between hard work, discipline, and fear was what kept the army cohesive. It wasn't the power of a commander that guaranteed success, but the relentless obedience of every legionary. Even when exhausted, sick, or surrounded by the enemy, they knew that maintaining discipline was their only chance of survival. The result of this mentality was one of the greatest empires in history, sustained not only by quick victories, but by a structure built to withstand the test of time. While other armies relied on immediate conquests, the Romans built to last. And it's this longevity that continues to fascinate historians to this day. But was the price of this brutal discipline too high? Do you think a modern army could achieve the same level of effectiveness without such rigid methods? Comment below, we'd love to hear your opinion. The truth is, the strength of the Roman army didn't come from a single secret, but from a precise combination exhaustive training, rigid discipline, and a strategic vision that went beyond immediate battles. The legions understood that victory wasn't just a matter of brute force, but of absolute control over the battlefield supplies and even their own men. This organized and relentless machine transformed Rome into the superpower that dominated 3 continents for centuries. But much like the gladiators, Roman soldiers didn't always experience the glory shown in movies. Their daily lives could be brutal, and many faced something far from the promised glory. Want to know how Hollywood distorts the lives of gladiators? Check out the shocking truth behind the myth in the video appearing for you right now.